guest. So today I'm going to be talking about, with my guest, domestic violence and how it affects children and children running away. You can join the conversation when my guest gets here by calling 01924 505 629, or you can WhatsApp and text on 07460 809 218. That's 01924 505 629. You can call that number. That's straight onto the hotline, or WhatsApp and text on 07460 809 218. We'll just go for another break, seeing as we're waiting for my guest. So, sorry about this, listeners.
Online and on your home receiver, you're listening to Radio IMWS. Hire the Al Hikmah Center for your weddings, functions and events, with segregated halls for men and women, including independent access, able to accommodate 1,500 guests, private car park with car park attendants, easy access, great location and full free Wi-Fi. There's no place better for your special day. For bookings and inquiries, call 01924 500 555 or email info@imws.org.uk or visit our website at www.imws.org.uk. The Al Hikmah Center, where your special day becomes a cherished memory. It is related by Sayyidina Anas radiallahu anhu that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, when a man marries, he has completed half of his religion, so let him fear Allah regarding the remaining half. The Al Hikmah Nikah service launched by the IMWS aims to introduce prospective marriage partners to help fulfill this important aspect of faith. The service is open to unmarried Muslims who are permanent residents of the UK. For more information, visit our website at www.imws.org.uk. Radio IMWS. Radio IMWS.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. You are listening to Radio IMWS, broadcasting live from the Al Hikmah Center. I am Safeeyah and this is Safeeyah's Hour. Sorry about the short delay, but my guest has now arrived. I have with me today Mr. Abdul Aziz Daji. How are you today?
Assalamu alaikum, Safeeyah and listeners. I'm very well, thank you very much.
Tell us about yourself and your time as a social worker.
Right. Yes, I started my career as a social worker back in 1983 when I applied for a post as trainee social worker. And myself and my good friend Rafiq Patel managed to secure posts as trainees at Batley Social Services, based in Batley Town Hall. So that's how I started my career as an unqualified trainee social worker. I worked 18 months at Batley to get some training behind me. Then fortunately I was seconded onto Huddersfield University, which was Huddersfield Polytechnic at the time, for a 2-year course on CQSW, it was called Certificate of Training in Social Work, it was at the time. So I did the 2 years course at Huddersfield University, which included theory, practice and placements as well. After the 2 years, I was successful as a social worker. I qualified. I then went back to Batley and I was working as a qualified social worker, carrying a caseload, what they call at the time generic caseload, which included elderly, disability cases and children families as well. And I worked there for 2 more years after that. Then I went on to education social work in Huddersfield. After that, I did a stint as a lecturer at Leeds Metropolitan University, lecturing in social work theory and practice for a couple of years. Then I came back to Batley again. A few months later, I became team manager. And then about a couple of years later, I became unit manager at Batley, where I was managing a team of social workers, around 50 social workers working with children and families at the time. By then, we'd become a specialist service. So my role was within children and families only and did not include elderly or disability. Basically, when we first started in Batley, and for some years after that, there were very, very few cases of Asian children and families, mainly white children. And then we began to get a few cases of Asian children. But by the time I left, after I left, I was unit manager at Batley. I then became unit manager of North Kirklees, which included Dewsbury, Cleckheaton, and Heckman-Wyke. And then I became quality manager within Kirklees. Then I left there to go to Sheffield as a service manager. So coming back to Batley and Kirklees Children's Services, there were very few Asian cases at the time, which was good in some ways, which meant that the families were close-knit, the children did not need input from social services, and hopefully meant that they were well looked after, but not necessarily so. By the time I finished, I left Kirklees in 2006. We had an increasing number of cases involving Asian Muslim children families as well, some of whom were looked after children, some of whom were children in need, some also were based in fostering and adoption as well. So the numbers continued to grow. And some of the cases also included family breakups, domestic violence, children being neglected, not cared for properly, hence having to be brought into care. So so going back to the beginning again, when I first became a social worker, I thought, fantastic, what a great job. I could actually help people. So that was my aim as a social worker, thinking I could go into social work and help people, which fortunately I did manage to. But at the same time, as I got more and more into children's cases, I realized it wasn't just helping people. There was also a controlling element, which was you had to use the law to protect children. Hence, there were times when you have to bring children into care, going through the court process, which sometimes meant that you had to get a care order and remove the child from the family home and placing them elsewhere for their own protection. That was difficult, going into a home to take a child away, very, very difficult indeed, because obviously I had my own children, etc. as well. So I appreciated the impact on the families. At the same time, there wasn't much hesitation because the job was actually protecting the children that needed protecting. So when you look at it from the child's point of view, you had to take the action that was necessary to protect the child. And if that meant removing the child from the family, you had no option but to do that. And that was painful, but it was something that had to be done. That's the job of a social worker, to provide support, but also to make sure the children are protected and safe at the same time as well.
But before you went into social work, how did you actually come to decide that social work is what you wanted to do as a career?
Yeah, good question. Basically, after leaving school, I ended up in DSS in Dewsbury for 6 years, which was a job I didn't fully enjoy. And I was looking for something else, something more meaningful in my view that I could do. And that was when the opening came about in Kirklees for a trainee social worker. And when I saw the advert, immediately I thought, fantastic, I wish I could get this job. And it was only thanks to Allah that I applied and managed to get the job. And that was when I realized that this was my vocation in life. This was what I really wanted to do. I've always enjoyed social work. I found it very rewarding, despite the problems and the things that you had to do. So that was after I got into social work, I realized that this was a job that I really wanted to do. That's why I was in social work for about 25 years altogether.
Domestic violence is a crime, and major social problems affected many families. Children who see, get involved, or hear violence are affected in many ways. Children will learn how to act from what their parents do. Domestic violence teaches children bad things about relationships and how to deal with people. Mr. Darji, in your time as a social worker, did you come across children from a background of domestic violence, and how did it affect these children? What were they like?
Yes, as part of training as a social worker, you have to do child development. And of course, as you do that, you realize that child development is a very, very important aspect. And it's about how children develop from being born to becoming older and older. And part of that is about every child and any child needs a secure and a loving family background. So any child that manages to live in a family where the parents are living well together, looking after the children, those children will grow up hopefully without much trauma in their life. There are other children that actually grow up in families, and I've seen too many of those cases as a social worker, where for a host of reasons, there are problems within the family. There are all kinds of issues. There are problems between husband and wife, which sometimes leads to domestic violence as well. And growing up in that situation where a child might witness parents quarreling, arguing, where there is violence in the family, then that has a major impact on the child to actually witness that, perhaps day in, day out, when that is happening. And that will impact on the child and their development as they get older as well. And that is where the children actually sometimes do need to be removed from that situation and offered the appropriate kind of support. And of course, it's sometimes that children are affected in the short term, and providing the problems can be dealt with, children will grow up and be balanced individuals. But if this is prolonged, then it will affect the child as they grow older. And within those situations, children can feel frightened, very, very frightened, and then it affects their life. For example, when they're in school or nursery, the staff may see behavior in the children where they may not be able to mix with the other children very well. They may be becoming shy, quiet. There could also be bedwetting, etc. So it's those kind of behaviors that manifest itself in the children. And sometimes within the school situation, the good teachers will actually pick up on some of that and actually begin to deal with that appropriately through the right channels. But there are many other ways emotionally as well that children could be, you may not see damage on a child that's physical, but the damage could be psychological within the child. And that is very, 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 very bad, very important as well in terms of being able to pick that up properly and offering the right kind of support to the child. If the children are older, they may be witnessing this kind of behavior, and it does lead some children, older children as well, to run away from home. And I've seen many of those situations where children have just run away from home, and social workers have to intervene, bring the child back, and in some situations may have to place a child in care to work towards either rehabilitation home if the situation has improved, or alternative options there as well. So and other kind of behavior in school, for example, their performance within the school setting could be affected as well. They may not be able to concentrate, etc., etc. So all kinds of behavior to manifest themselves in the child, and it's about the professionals picking up those signs and actually dealing with those appropriately. Over the years, social workers has developed very well into providing good services. In the past, perhaps these signs have been missed. Children who may have been abused in many ways may not have received the appropriate support. And we see many of those cases still coming, 20, 30 years, 15 years back, where appropriate action was not taken and things then come to light. Some of that could be sexual abuse, for example, within the family setting or outside of that, which nowadays is actually dealt with hopefully far better than it was in the past. So children could suffer all kinds of abuse, from physical abuse, mental abuse, psychological abuse, to actually sexual abuse as well. And it's about how we then help those children who have been damaged through their experience to actually grow up to be balanced individuals with the right kind of support through social workers.
We now understand that domestic violence has a major effect on children. How can these children actually be helped?
Right. First of all, it's the voice of the child. So is the child able to speak to others and actually voice their views and their concerns to anybody, or is the child suffering in silence? And what goes on in the home situation? How controlling are the parents? Sometimes children might be abused, and the children are so frightened that they dare not speak to anybody else. And that is a difficult situation to deal with. But if the signs are picked up elsewhere in school setting or nursery setting, then those professionals would actually be able to get the right kind of support for the child, and actually then help the child to actually voice their views, and then the social worker could deal with those situations as appropriate in those situations.
Domestic violence can affect a child's future. What actions are social workers willing to take to save this child's future?
Yeah, social workers have a range of options available to them, from voluntary action, agreements with parents for whatever kind of plan is put into place. If that is not possible, and if there is sufficient evidence to actually take further action, then the social worker could resort to legal action, meaning taking action through court for interim care order, for place of safety to begin with, if that is necessary, to remove the child, and then ultimately through the court process to gain interim care orders and full care orders if necessary, which may then mean that there will be long-term alternative care for the child, with depending on the child, which could be fostering, long-term fostering, short-term fostering, or it could even be adoption, depending on the age of the child as well.
In your time as a social worker, was domestic violence made aware of as much as it has been made aware of today?
No, in those days, I would imagine 1780s, it was still earlier days for those kind of situations, and I don't think enough weight was given to those instances where there was domestic violence. There wasn't as much recognition also in terms of women who were suffering domestic violence. Perhaps they did not receive the right kind of support that they could have done. Obviously, there were women's refuges around in those days, and they have developed as well since. So there are other and voluntary organizations as well who are available to offer support. So I think increasingly there's been much more awareness. Women are aware of the support they can receive. Children are more aware as well. So hopefully there are services available that would be able to pinpoint earlier if there are concerns and issues that can be dealt with and supported for not only the woman but also the children as well.
Why do you think it has become more common in nowadays society?
Yeah, that's a good question, because you would have thought as we are a developed society that there would be less issues, concerns, problems for families, and that there will be more support. We are a more affluent society than we have been in the past. Although finance is just one aspect for any family, it is about the individuals within that marital situation, the husband, the wife. Sometimes if it's domestic violence from the man to the woman, it could be that the man suffers from some kind of personality disorders that may affect his behavior, which also may manifest itself in him being violent towards the woman. It could be some triggers within their marital situation, instability, etc., arguments day in, day out, which could lead to further arguments, which could then lead to domestic violence. But also domestic violence is not just one way. There are instances where women have been violent towards men as well, and that needs to be recognized as well. So I think there are a host of all kinds of different reasons. At the end of the day, it's the individual, couple, and the family, and what goes on within that setting, their backgrounds. For example, if one or either of them have suffered some kind of abuse in the past within their own life, that could also affect their behavior as well. And those are aspects that perhaps are important as well. But at the same time, it's about if in social work, early intervention is a very, very important aspect, which means that rather than sitting back until there are problems in the family that leads to domestic violence, that leads to family breakup, that leads to the child having to become taken into care, early intervention means that the signs are picked up early through the different professionals working with children and families, so that earlier support can be provided to the parents, to the child, which means that the more heavier action like care orders, etc., would not be necessary. And over the years, councils across the country have identified that. And for example, my job in Sheffield, where I was service manager for multi-agency support team, and I was managing a team of social workers, health visitors, school nurses, and education welfare officers. And we also worked closely with schools and with the police, so that we could provide a multi-agency response to the family setting, and hence earlier support, which means that if the earlier support is there, there's less tension within the family. That means then it doesn't lead to other situations, including violence as well. And more across the country, there has been recognition of this, and more support and financial support has been put into earlier intervention support to families as well, which I fully agree with as a ex-social worker myself.
What actions should family and friends take if they know someone who is committing this crime around children?
Right, that is a very, very difficult question for anyone. So, for example, if you know other family members, if you come across issues around your neighbors, or you hear violent arguments, with your neighbors, etc., what do you do? And that is very difficult, because nobody wants to be known as a snitch. Nobody wants to kind of report somebody else, because perhaps it may come back to them as well. They could be in some kind of danger. There's that aspect. Plus, at the same time, it's very difficult, perhaps, to pick up a phone to report them for those. So, bearing that in mind, it would be difficult for people in the community, although it does happen, to actually, because sometimes what people might do is pick up the phone either to the police or to social services and report an incident that they may have witnessed. And we would get a lot of phone calls around those as well, where they wouldn't have to give their name, but they could report incidents, and those would be investigated by social workers to find out what the facts are, and then follow through as appropriate. So for friends and families or neighbors, it is a difficult situation for them to get involved in. And a lot of people might think, none of my business, I'm not going to get involved. So whilst maybe that's one kind of reaction, the other one might be, well, if there's a child involved, if there's a woman involved who's in receipt of domestic violence, then should you just fully ignore that, or are there ways that you can report that? And as I say, you can report things. You don't necessarily have to give your name and address, so at least you can feel you did your bit. And then it would be for the professionals to take over from there, and whatever happens is not your responsibility, because you were not involved in that incident. You are simply making sure that the person on the receiving end, the victim, was actually receiving the support that they need.
We'll just go for a quick break. After the break, I have some more questions for Mr. Daji about children running away.
Online and on your home receiver, you're listening to Radio IMWS. Hire the Al Hikmah Center for your weddings, functions and events, with segregated halls for men and women, including independent access, able to accommodate 1,500 guests, private car park with car park attendants, easy access, great location and full free Wi-Fi. There's no place better for your special day. For bookings and inquiries, call 01924 500 555 or email info@imws.org.uk, or visit our website at www.imws.org.uk. The Al Hikmah Center, where your special day becomes a cherished memory. It is related by Sayyidina Anas radiallahu anhu that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, when a man marries, he has completed half of his religion, so let him fear Allah regarding the remaining half. The Al Hikmah Nikah service launched by the IMWS aims to introduce prospective marriage partners to help fulfill this important aspect of faith. The service is open to unmarried Muslims who are permanent residents of the UK. For more information, visit our website at www.imws.org.uk. Radio IMWS.
Assalamu alaikum. You are listening to Radio IMWS, broadcasting live from the Al Hikmah Center. I am Safeeyah, and this is Safeeyah's Hour. Many children run away because they are trying to tell us that they are unhappy, or trying to find out just how much we care about them. Some children who run away from home might be looking for somewhere else to live because they feel unsafe in their own home, or they may have problems which they feel they are unable to talk to their parents about. Mr. Daji, have you ever worked with children who have run away from home?
Unfortunately, I have. Unfortunately, because when a child runs away, then clearly there are concerns, issues for that child. There are problems at home. which leads to the child running away, which is very unfortunate because children should not have to run away from home. They should be brought up in good, caring, loving families, which is what every child deserves. I have actually dealt with individual cases as a social worker and as a manager, but also latterly in my time in Kirklees around about 2002, 2003. I was a quality manager and I had a budget to spend. So one of the projects that we funded was jointly with NSPCC and the police as well, which was a project around supporting children who run away from home. So clearly, there are many children across the country that actually do run away from home, and when that happens, then you will be concerned about the child's safety as well. So fortunately, there has been a multi-agency response, not just in Kirklees, but other parts of the country as well, where clearly we have to work with the police as well in terms of their role to try to find the child, and then to work with social services and volunteer organizations to support the child. So children do run away from home for all kinds of reasons, and it's about what kind of support is available to children to actually support them. And there are organizations, others like NSPCC, Bernardo's volunteer organizations, national ones, that are also run a range of projects to support children in those situations. So one part is about having identified a child who's missing. It's about what you can do with the police to bring to find the child and bring the child back, and then what kind of support do you provide to them. And one aspect would be to try and rehabilitate them back home to the families if possible. And there will be cases where you can actually do that positively with continued support from the social worker. The child is not left on their own. Other situations where that is not possible, then the child would have to be brought into care, possibly on a voluntary basis for a while to see whether you can eventually rehabilitate them back. So yeah, these things still happen. Children are still running away, probably on a daily basis nationally. And that obviously the problem is what's happening within their family home situations. There might be other children who it may be difficult for the parents to care for them, to control them, and it could be the child's behavior that leads to tensions within the family home situations as well, especially teenagers. And it's about in those situations where the child runs away, it may not be entirely the parent's fault in what leads to that. But at the same time, in those situations, you would expect to provide support to the child, the teenager, as well as the parents, to try and deal with the issues and the problems and the concerns that they may be, to try and keep the child at home if at all possible.
Could you tell us the common reasons why a child ran away from home?
Yeah, it kind of does vary quite a lot. It could be, hopefully very small children would not be running away from home. So it would usually be teenagers, 12, 13 onwards, whatever, and plus that actually do run away from home. And it could be due with one-off incident in the family home that leads to that's escalated, and then it leads to that, and the child might just, without thinking, just run away, thinking I have to escape from this, and runs without thinking. It could be in other situations where it's a buildup of tensions, where the child actually feels that they're suffering at home and can no longer stay at home. It could be that there are tensions between husband and wife that leads to a climate within the family where the child just does not feel appropriately cared for. So it's difficult to pinpoint specific things, but it could be a range of things that actually leads to those situations where the child unfortunately then feels that they need to run away from that setting and go elsewhere.
Young people who run away from home and end up sleeping rough are extremely vulnerable to sexual and physical abuse and are likely to be offered drugs and alcohol. What actions were taken to ensure the child's safety?
Yeah. First and foremost, working with the police, you would hope to find the child. As soon as you find the child, then the social worker needs to take over the case and talking to the child, and the immediate situation would be to what happens to the child then. And obviously inquiries will be made, with the family situation to see what's happening there, because you need to build up a good picture and begin the assessment process as well. And the assessment needs the social worker to gather all the relevant information from as many sources as possible, so they have a good full picture on which they can then begin to plan. And any plan needs to then include the child, so the child's voice is very important, but also to include the parents and to try and work out a plan that actually helps the child. So safety is paramount. I wouldn't expect a social worker to pick up a child that's run away, take them back home and leave them there. That would not be good social work practice. You would have to look into that, carry out a thorough assessment, even if that means for a few days the child does not return home, enabling the social work to carry out appropriate enquiries, and then to build up a picture through an assessment process, then to make a decision jointly with any of the professionals, with the child, with the parents, to say this is what we need to do to work together. So working together, including the child in the decision-making process and the parents, is very, very important. It cannot be just a social worker thinking they know best and they will make decisions. That would be wrong. And that is not what happens nowadays on the whole either.
What actions should parents or carers take when a child has run away from home?
Right. Depending on the situation, there may be a one-off situation where the child's gone, and if the parents should know more or less in terms of their instinct might tell them. If it's not the normal kind of pattern and the child's gone missing, then panic alarm should be ringing. And after a small amount of time, if the child has not returned, then really the parent should be contacting the police to report the child as missing. And then appropriate action will be taken through the police, social services, etc. If, on the other hand, there's some kind of what you might call a regular pattern where the child goes missing, that would be a different situation, because the parents know that's happening. But even in that situation, the child should be reported to the police, so the police can actually take action to find the child. The parents would also be able to provide information that they may be aware of in terms of where the child frequents, their friends, families, etc. At the same time, I've come across situations where children end up in homes where there may be men who actually encourage children to enter their homes, and those are the situations that would spell a big danger for the safety of the children, because there might be men in those situations who might be exploiting children for their own reasons, and there are times when I came across some of those cases where the police were aware, fortunately, of those adults, and appropriate action was taken at the same time as well by the police.
We hear about children being physically abused in madrasa. Could you tell us more about this?
Yeah, this is something that has been very close to my heart, and as a social worker, we used to get occasional, in the earlier days, cases of those, but I'm not sure that it was appropriately dealt with in my early work as a social worker. But as we developed, I actually took responsibility with my friend Rafiq Patel and Kausatai, who was a social worker in Kirklis at the time as well. We used to go around madrasas to talk to them about safeguarding and child protection, and to actually spell out that physical chastisement, that means using your hands or your sticks, etc., was not allowed in this country and needs to stop. Eventually, when I was managing a budget as quality manager, I actually funded a project called Safeguarding, where we recruited a worker. His name was Shakil Hafiz. I'm sure you won't mind me mentioning that, because Shakil has been working very, very hard over many years since his appointment. And I used to be leading on that project, where we set up a safeguarding project. And Shakil was integral to that. And his job was to work with children, with madrasas, to help them to build up policies and procedures whereby chastisement actually came to an end. And I have no time for any madrasa that allows a child to be chastised physically within that setting. That is not allowed in this country. It's illegal. And if anybody is found to do that, then appropriate action would be taken. And that has got nothing to do with being anti-Islamic or anything like that. Islam, of course, does not condone that kind of behavior anyway. And whilst, as we know, in India and Pakistan and elsewhere, there has been a tradition where, unfortunately, may not be the right word, but where in madrasas, very, very bad chastisement has been used. Children have almost been killed, and there may have been incidents where children have been killed by the teacher. In this country, there are laws which actually means that children are protected. And whether you are a teacher in a madrasa or whether you are other kind of a professional teacher, you have no right to use physical chastisement to children. I'm glad to say that through my efforts and other people's and Shakil's, etc., and social services in general, that there has been much more awareness within madrasa settings to actually deal with this. And I know that I've worked with many local madrasas to help them to build up policies, and Shakil has as well, so that they have safeguarding policies where the teachers have also provided with the right kind of training and support to inform them what's allowed and what's not, and how controlling mechanisms, etc., can be used without using physical chastisement. So, for example, there are behavior modification techniques. There are stars awarded, etc. Other ways to manage behavior management is called, rather than using physical chastisement. So fortunately, I would say on the whole in Kirklees, I can't talk across about the whole of the country, but certainly in Kirklees, the project has had a very positive impact. And I would imagine most of the madrasas in Kirklees, across Kirklees, have developed much better, and many of them will have, if not all of them, have those policies in place, and the management committee knows what's allowed, what's not allowed, and what their responsibility is as a management committee, and also the teachers on what their responsibility is. Unfortunately, we may still hear of the odd incidents where that still happens, and where that happens, then social services are involved, and they actually follow through any reporting that they hear of. They would follow through, and they would deal with the appropriate madrasa committee and follow through. And if necessary, it would also lead to prosecution of that teacher. And I think the teachers need to know, this is what we used to tell them through the training that we provided to them as well, that if you are responsible for physically chastising children to the extent where action is taken against you and you end up in court, you may also end up in prison. Remember that your own family may be in danger, because if that happens and you are prosecuted, then you are what's known as a Schedule 1 offender. And that means that any child that you come into contact with, the social service would be interested in and would be actually involved in. So if you were sent to prison, when you return to the family setting, an risk assessment would take place to determine whether you would be allowed back into your own family as well. So the teachers need to know there are much wider repercussions and implications for them, and simply excuses like the child drove me to it or I lost my temper is just definitely not on. So teachers need to be very well aware what the law is in this country, what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, and teach appropriately in a positive manner within the madrasa setting, rather than resorting to physical violence. And that is something I have very, very staunchly advocated in terms of putting a stop to that, and providing a safe, positive culture within the madrasa setting for our children. So when they go to the madrasa, they actually look forward to going to the madrasa, they learn, and then they leave madrasa with a lot more about knowledge about Islam than thinking the only thing I remember about going to madrasa is being hit by the teacher. So we want to turn that around positively and make it a very positive experience. So it's a conducive environment for children to learn and grow up and actually value the madrasa teaching. Also bearing in mind that it is not easy for management committees to run the madrasas. These are all volunteers who work really hard to run the masjids and madrasas on a daily basis. So they put their own time and effort in to running and managing the madrasas, and I think they deserve credit for that. So they have a very hard job. Nowadays they employ then there are many heads within madrasas as well, which is a very good initiative. The head then takes responsibility for managing a madrasa, and then the ustads also more and more receive appropriate training, which includes safeguarding. And I know even recently Shakil Hafiz has circulated a flyer around training available for ustads, and that is an ongoing process as well. So from where I was as a social worker, new social worker in 1983, where we were years behind, to when I left, and nowadays I think we've developed very well. That doesn't mean to say that we should be complacent. There may still be some madrasa management committee that may not be as strong as they need to be. There might still be one-off teachers that may think they can hit a child, beat a child, and get away with it. So we still need to continue working away and providing the support and the training so that we continue to improve those settings.
For the women listening today who are suffering domestic violence, what would you say to them right now?
I think no one, whether it's a man or a woman, should be on the receiving end of violence from anyone, whether it's in the family setting, whether it's through the partner, whether it's through parents or whoever. So no one deserves that. No one should have to endure that. But the difficulty for that individual is how do they deal with it, and what kind of support mechanisms are available to them. It is very difficult, say for example, for a woman who's on the receiving end of domestic violence, to think, what do I do? How do I deal with this? Do I just endure this, or do I report this to somebody? And there would be a lot of fear involved attached to that as well, in terms of what would happen if they were to report that, because there could then be split within the family, there could be children involved. So I think it is very, very difficult for example, say a woman in that situation who's on receiving end, and it's difficult to kind of give simple answers to those situations. But at the same time, we need to make sure that there is awareness of services available for the women or for the man if he's on the receiving end, and then how they can take it from there. At the same time, everybody has limits to what they can endure. So it's about when the breaking point is and what action they take. And then it may lead to other situations, but at the same time, the victim should not blame themselves for whatever happens afterwards. It's the perpetrator that's responsible for that, and not the victim. And it's about how, for example, within our community, still we don't have real mechanisms to provide support to women around domestic violence. So there may be issues. Nationally, there have been organizations that have provided support. Locally, of course, there are women refugees and other volunteer organizations that do provide help. But also, you can never have enough help. So again, if we can work out ways of providing better support within our own community, then that would be a very, very good thing.
For parents listening today, if they have a child that's run away, what would your advice be to them?
Now, it depends on the situation, the age of the child, the situation that led to that. So we need to have that awareness of that. And then it's about, if there's concerns about the child that's run off, then the first action you need to take to ensure the safety of the child is to report it to the police as soon as you feel it's necessary. After a bit of time. So that is the first action that I would suggest that anybody needs to take, because the police then, it is their job, and they have the resources as well, hopefully, to try and find the child as quickly as possible, and then to take it from there. But if that happens within your family setting and the child is left, then please don't just jump to the conclusion and blame the child. Please, with a calm head, think about the situation, think of it from the child's point of view, and instead of then, as soon as the child is at home, shouting at them again and blaming them, do take responsibility as a parent and actually look at that. If that means that you need support from family members or from professionals, please do get that support so that a third party is involved, which will help you and the child to actually work out a way. So there are no simple solutions. These are difficult issues, but if parents take responsibility as good parents and get the right kind of support and look at it from the child's point of view and provide support to them, then hopefully will lead to positive outcomes rather than running away frequently, which then, eventually will break up the family as well.
Radio IMWS.
If your child goes missing and you don't know where they have gone, contact the police. Word of advice: allow your child to trust and bond with another member of the family, as when times are rough, rather than running away or putting themselves in danger, they may go to this relative instead. This was Safeeyah on Safeeyah's Hour, live on Radio IMWS. Thank you for listening, and I will be back on next week, Saturday at 5. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Online and on your home receiver, you're listening to Radio IMWS.
Hire the Al Hikmah Center for your weddings, functions and events with segregated halls for men and women, including independent access,